two people bought Ethereum at the same time. Same month, same price, same amount invested. One of them is sitting on life-changing money right now. The other one rage sold at the worst possible moment and swore off crypto forever. Same asset, same entry point, completely different outcomes. And the difference had absolutely nothing to do with luck, insider knowledge, or timing the market perfectly. It had everything to do with understanding what Ethereum actually is, where it's actually going, and why the story most people are telling themselves about it in 2025 is dangerously incomplete. Here's the brutal truth that nobody in the crypto space has the guts to say out loud. Most people holding Ethereum right now don't understand what they own. They bought it because someone on social media told them it was going to $10,000, or because their coworker mentioned it at the water cooler, or because they saw it trending on Reddit and didn't want to miss out. They have no framework for evaluating it, no thesis for holding it, and absolutely no plan for what happens if it drops another 40% before it goes up. That's not investing. That's gambling with extra steps. And in 2026, that distinction is going to matter more than it ever has before. Let me tell you why this video exists. The Ethereum landscape in 2026 is genuinely unlike anything we've seen before in the asset's history. The network has gone through transformations so fundamental that comparing it to Ethereum of 2020 is like comparing the iPhone 15 to a Nokia brick. The economics have shifted. The competitive dynamics have shifted. The institutional posture has shifted. And yet the conversation most people are having about it is still anchored in narratives that are 5 years stale. Ethereum is the world computer. ETT is ultrasound money. It's going to flip Bitcoin. These aren't necessarily wrong, but they're incomplete in ways that could cost you real money if you're not paying attention. According to a 2024 Grayscale Investments research report, Ethereum remains the dominant smart contract platform by developer activity, with over 4,000 monthly active developers building on its ecosystem, a number that dwarfs every competing Layer 1 blockchain combined. That's not nothing. Developer activity is the single best leading indicator of long-term network value, and Ethereum's lead there is substantial. But here's what the same report quietly buried in the footnotes. Ethereum's market share of total DeFi total value locked dropped from 67% in early 2022 to approximately 55% by late 2024. Still dominant, but the trajectory is unmistakably downward. Both things are true simultaneously, and most people in the Ethereum community want to talk about only one of them. Picture Marcus, 34 years old, software engineer in Austin, Texas, making $145,000 a year. Marcus bought Ethereum in November 2021 at an average price of $4,200 per ETH. He put in $42,000, 10 ETH. He'd done his research. He understood the merge was coming. He believed in the technology, and he had genuine conviction. Then Ethereum dropped to $880 in June 2022. His $42,000 became $8,800. Marcus held. It came back. By early 2024, it crossed $3,500 again, and Marcus was almost back to even. Then it pulled back again. Marcus is still holding, and right now he's trying to figure out whether the thesis he bought into 3 years ago still applies to the Ethereum of 2026, which looks and behaves fundamentally differently from the Ethereum he thought he was buying. Now picture Diane. Same age as Marcus, works in healthcare administration in Denver, also makes around $140,000 a year. Diane bought Ethereum in January 2023 at $1,500 per ETH. She put in the same $42,000, 28 ETH. Diane didn't have Marcus's technical background, but she had something arguably more valuable. She spent 3 months before buying doing nothing but reading Ethereum's roadmap documents, studying the post-merge tokenomics, and understanding exactly what she was buying and why. When the price dropped to $1,100 in late 2023, Diane bought more. She now holds 36 ETH. At current prices, her position is worth substantially more than Marcus's, despite starting with identical capital. Same asset, completely different outcomes. The difference wasn't timing, it was understanding. That's the framework for this entire conversation. Because in 2026, Ethereum is at an inflection point that will separate the people who actually understand what they own from the people who are just along for the ride, hoping the number goes up. And the stakes are genuinely significant. According to data from Chainalysis's 2024 Geography of Cryptocurrency report, approximately 28 million Americans now hold some amount of Ethereum. That's not a niche asset for tech nerds anymore. That's roughly the population of Texas holding a financial instrument that most of them cannot coherently explain. The implications of that gap between ownership and understanding are enormous, and we're going to walk through every single one of them. Here's what we're covering in this video. We're going to look at what Ethereum actually is in 2026, not in the abstract philosophical sense, but in the concrete, mechanistic, economic sense. We're going to look at the real competitive threats, not the ones the Ethereum community dismisses with a wave of their hand, but the ones that are actually showing up in the data. We're going to walk through the tokenomics in detail, because the post-merge, post-EIP 1559 supply dynamics are genuinely fascinating and genuinely misunderstood by most retail holders. We're going to look at what institutional money is actually doing with Ethereum right now, not what they're saying publicly. And we're going to talk about what all of this means for your actual financial decisions. Not vague advice, but specific frameworks with specific numbers. One more thing before we go deep. I want to be clear about what this video is not. This is not a price prediction. Anyone who tells you with confidence that Ethereum will be at $8,000 or $800 by the end of 2026 is either lying to you or lying to themselves. The honest answer is that nobody knows, and the people who claim to know are selling you something. What I can tell you is what the fundamental drivers of Ethereum's value are, how those drivers are performing right now, what the realistic bull and bear cases look like with actual supporting evidence, and how to think about position sizing and risk management in a way that doesn't require you to be right about the price to protect your financial well-being. The number that should be anchoring this entire conversation is one that most people have never looked up. As of the first quarter of 2025, Ethereum's annualized fee revenue, the actual economic activity happening on the network, measured in dollars paid by users to use it, was approximately $1.8 billion. That's down significantly from the $10 billion peak in 2021, but it's also up from the $800 million trough in 2023. Understanding why that number moved the way it did and where it's likely to go is the entire ballgame. Everything else is noise. If this is already shifting how you think about what Ethereum actually represents as an asset, drop a comment right now. I want to know what assumption you're already starting to question, because we're just getting started, and the next layer of this story is where it gets genuinely complicated. The fee revenue number matters because Ethereum is not Bitcoin. Bitcoin's investment thesis is essentially one-dimensional. It's a scarce, decentralized store of value. You evaluate it the way you evaluate gold: supply, demand, monetary properties. Ethereum's thesis is multidimensional and significantly harder to evaluate, which is exactly why so many smart people get it wrong. Ethereum is simultaneously a monetary asset, a productive asset generating fee revenue, a platform whose value depends on the applications built on it, and a settlement layer for an entire ecosystem of Layer 2 networks that are both Ethereum's greatest strength and its most complicated challenge. Hold that thought, because the Layer 2 story is one of the most counterintuitive dynamics in all of crypto right now, and we're going to spend serious time on it. Let's start with the Layer 2 situation, because this is where the narrative gets genuinely weird and genuinely important. If you've been following Ethereum for any length of time, you've heard the Layer 2 pitch. Networks like Arbitrum, Optimism, Base, and ZK Sync process transactions off the main Ethereum chain, batch them together, and settle the final state back to Ethereum. The result is transactions that cost fractions of a cent instead of dollars, with speeds that actually compete with Visa. The Ethereum community celebrates this as a triumph of scalability. And it is. But here's the part they're not celebrating. Those same Layer 2 networks are cannibalizing Ethereum's fee revenue in ways that the base layer has not fully adapted to yet. Think about it this way. When you use Base, Coinbase's Layer 2 built on Ethereum, you're paying fees denominated in ETH, but those fees are tiny. The bulk of the economic activity, the actual user transactions, are happening on Base's infrastructure, not on Ethereum's mainnet. Ethereum mainnet sees a compressed, batched settlement transaction. It earns a fraction of what it would have earned if those same users had transacted directly on Layer 1. This is the architectural bargain Ethereum made when it chose the roll-up-centric roadmap. Sacrifice short-term fee revenue in exchange for long-term scalability and ecosystem growth. That's a defensible strategic choice, but it has real consequences for the tokenomics in the near term, and anyone holding ETH needs to understand exactly what those consequences are. Here's the data that puts it in stark relief. According to Token Terminal's 2024 annual report, Ethereum mainnet's daily fee revenue averaged approximately $4.2 million per day in Q3 2024. In the same period, the combined Layer 2 ecosystem, Arbitrum, Optimism, Base, ZK Sync, and others, processed roughly 8 times the transaction volume of Ethereum mainnet. 8 times the activity, a fraction of the fee capture. Now, the optimistic framing is that Ethereum is like a landlord collecting rent from a booming city it built. The pessimistic framing is that Ethereum built the city but forgot to install toll booths. The truth is somewhere in between, and it depends almost entirely on whether EIP 4844, the proto-danksharding upgrade that went live in March 2024, ends up being a bridge to greater fee capture or a permanent structural reduction in mainnet revenue. This is not a settled question. Serious Ethereum researchers are genuinely divided on it, and anyone who tells you they know for certain which way it goes is overconfident. What we can say is this. The bull case requires that the sheer volume of Layer 2 activity eventually generates enough blob fee revenue to compensate for the reduction in mainnet gas fees. The bear case is that blob fees stay structurally low because Layer 2s are competing with each other on cost, which means Ethereum mainnet gets squeezed from both sides. Less gas revenue from users migrating to L2s, and low blob fees because L2s won't pay more than they have to. Watch the blob fee data. It's the single most important on-chain metric for evaluating whether Ethereum's roll-up-centric strategy is actually working as designed. Now let's talk about the competitive landscape, because this is where I'm going to say something that will make Ethereum maximalists genuinely uncomfortable. Solana is not a joke. I know that's not a popular opinion in certain corners of the internet, and I know that Solana had its catastrophic FTX moment in late 2022 that nearly killed it. But the network that emerged from that crisis is fundamentally different from the one that went into it. Solana's developer ecosystem grew by approximately 83% year over year in 2024, according to Electric Capital's developer report. Its DeFi TVL recovered to over $8 billion by early 2025. Its consumer-facing applications, particularly in payments and gaming, are outperforming Ethereum's equivalent ecosystem by user count metrics that are hard to dismiss. Here's what this means for Ethereum holders specifically. Solana is not going to replace Ethereum. The two networks are optimized for fundamentally different things. Ethereum is optimized for security, decentralization, and serving as a trust-minimized settlement layer. Solana is optimized for speed, throughput, and low-cost consumer applications. But the market hasn't fully priced in the implications of a world where both networks coexist, and each captures the use cases it's genuinely best suited for. The old narrative, that Ethereum wins everything, is being replaced by a more nuanced reality where Ethereum wins the high-value, high-security use cases, and other networks compete for the high-volume, low-margin use cases. That's not necessarily bad for Ethereum's long-term value, but it does mean the total addressable market that Ethereum captures is smaller than the maximalist vision suggested, and your price targets should reflect that. Now let's get to the tokenomics, because this is where Ethereum's story genuinely gets interesting in ways that most people haven't internalized. Post-merge, post-EIP 1559, Ethereum has a supply mechanism that has no precedent in financial history. Here's how it works. New ETH is issued as staking rewards to validators, roughly 0.5% of total supply per year under current conditions. Simultaneously, a portion of every transaction fee is burned, permanently removed from circulation. When network activity is high enough, the burn rate exceeds the issuance rate, and ETH becomes deflationary. When activity is low, it's mildly inflationary. The network is essentially a self-regulating monetary system that responds to its own economic activity. As of early 2025, approximately 28% of all ETH supply is staked. That's 28% of the assets sitting in validators, earning yield and not available for sale on the open market. When you combine that supply lockup with the burn mechanism, you get a situation where the effective circulating supply of ETH is significantly tighter than the headline number suggests. This is not theoretical, it's measurable. And it's one of the reasons that Ethereum price action tends to be more explosive on the upside during bull markets than the raw market cap numbers would predict. Less liquid supply means each marginal dollar of demand has a larger price impact. That's a structural advantage that most retail holders haven't done the math on. But here's the risk that the same retail holders are ignoring. Staking yield is not free money. It's compensation for taking on validator risk, including the risk of slashing, penalties for validator misbehavior, and the risk of smart contract bugs in the staking infrastructure itself. The Lido protocol, which controls approximately 28% of all staked ETH by itself, represents a single point of failure that the Ethereum community has been debating anxiously for 2 years. If Lido ever experienced a catastrophic exploit or governance failure, the downstream effects on staked ETH liquidity would be severe. This is a real risk, not a theoretical one, and it belongs in any honest assessment of Ethereum's risk profile. So where does all of this leave you? It leaves you at a decision point that requires honest self-assessment. Ask yourself 3 questions. First, do you understand the asset well enough to hold it through a 60% drawdown without panic selling? Not whether you think you can, whether you actually have the thesis to justify it. Second, is your position size calibrated to the actual risk profile of this asset, including the Layer 2 fee revenue uncertainty, the competitive pressure from alternative Layer 1s, and the staking concentration risk? Third, do you have a plan for what you do if the thesis changes? If the data starts showing that the roll-up-centric roadmap is not generating the fee revenue the bull case requires? Marcus didn't have answers to those questions when he bought at $4,200. Diane did when she bought at $1,500. That's the entire story. That's the only story that actually matters when you strip away the price predictions and the Twitter debates and the meme coins and the noise. Understanding what you own, why you own it, and exactly what would have to be true for you to be wrong. That's the edge. In 2026, with institutional money flowing in through ETFs, with regulatory clarity finally emerging, and with the technical roadmap hitting critical milestones, that edge is going to be worth more than it has ever been before. The question is whether you're going to show up with it. And that question is more urgent than it sounds, because the window for building genuine understanding before the next major price move is almost certainly shorter than most people assume. Historically, Ethereum's most violent upside moves have happened fast, weeks, not months. The 2020 DeFi summer caught almost everyone off guard. The 2021 NFT wave caught almost everyone off guard. The post-merge rally caught almost everyone off guard. The pattern is consistent. By the time the move is obvious, the easy money is already gone. The people who captured it weren't lucky. They were prepared. They had done the work during the boring stretches, the sideways months, the slow bleeds, the periods when crypto Twitter went quiet and everyone moved on to the next shiny thing. That's when Diane was reading roadmap documents. That's when the people who made generational wealth on Ethereum were building their conviction, stress testing their thesis, and sizing their positions deliberately. The market rewards preparation with a lag, and the lag always feels longer than it actually is. So the real question isn't whether Ethereum is going up or down in 2026. The real question is whether you'll be ready either way. With a thesis that holds under pressure, a position size that lets you sleep at night, and the discipline to act on what the data is actually telling you, instead of what you want it to say.